when you are going above and beyond what your job typically requires, right? And your employer is also recognizing that, where you're getting paid overtime. Should that be taxed the same way as your normal income? Now, it's tough because the argument always comes back to is, yes, that was your choice to kind of work those overtime shifts.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that's additional income that you are bringing in,
Well,
right?
and
So,
if, I guess maybe not everybody, like if I work overtime my job, it doesn't like benefit like most of the major institutions that support society. Really,
yeah,
like I
it's
guess maybe
more
we could
just
say it's
your
like, hey, I got
business.
the
Yeah.
sweeper running at the hospital, like, hey, like, you know what
Yeah.
I mean? But like there's like, there's like, just say like it's a construction worker, it's like, okay, well, like that road wasn't scheduled to be done until like a month from now, but these guys busted their nuts and got it done, and now they're free.
Yeah.
Now they're free to go do more projects around infrastructure projects around the city. So like, you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, that's, like you said, it is a personal choice.
Yeah. So it gets hard because it is, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what the rationale for um, why you chose to work it or the impact on society.
The fact is, you did.
You did, but it's also the fact that that is now more income that you have in your pocket. So I definitely, like, again, I can't speak to that idea of
Yes,
if
I
you
can't
get
remember.
taxed greater on overtime. I've never actually heard of that.
After like,
Um,
yeah,
if that was the case, I think that would be horrible, right? So I'm just gonna throw that out there. But I do have a hard, like, as much as I agree with you in some ways, where when you're working overtime, that it hurts. It's like almost feels like, oh my gosh, I had to work more hours than I should have, and then now I'm also paying more like taxes on top of that. Like, it felt like no benefit. It was just more that like my employer squeezed more out of me, right?
out of you, yeah,
um but then it is like, so there's always that gray area of like, if you were forced to work overtime, right, when you didn't want to, then it feels like a double whammy of, I'm now forced to be here on the weekend or something like that. And
yeah,
then I
yeah,
also am getting taxed by the government. But then I
yeah.
also see the flip side. Sorry, what were you saying?
No, no, no.
Or
I just flashbacks to
disagree?
working
Yeah.
in restaurants.
Flash,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
PTSD. Yeah.
yeah. It's of all the time you don't ask for that overtime hours. Sometimes people just
Yeah.
don't show up.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, but I do also see it as, at the end of the day, you walked home, taxes or not, with more money in your pocket after that week than you would on a typical week because you worked more, right?
Yeah,
The issue always comes into play is that there are some, like, some jobs just naturally pay more than others. So I could work 35 hours a week, you could work 40 hours a week, and
yeah,
we could come home with the same amount of money, right?
yeah,
Because
oh
we
yeah,
work different jobs, right?
yeah,
Um, but at the end of the day, if you didn't work those extra 5 hours, you would be taking home less money, right?
yeah.
So it is kind of hard, right? Because if you're going to have income taxes in the first place, I do understand why you would tax, like, continue to tax any source of income that you're kind of bringing home right at the end of the day.
Yeah, I still
Um,
like. Yeah, I agree to disagree on that one because,
well, because I think you're feeling the burn of it, right? But I
well,
don't
to a
know.
degree, yeah. But like, it's like, yeah, there's so many different jobs out there, right? Like, it's just,
So here's a, like, I'll again, you don't have to agree with me, but I'm going to try to persuade you here. Let's say you don't work overtime, but
yeah,
instead you work a second job,
yeah, been there.
right? So are
Yeah.
you, from that same logic, would you say at that second job you shouldn't get taxed?
Well, I feel like I should get taxed more for having another job.
But it's not that you get taxed more, right? Like, it's just based off of the marginal tax rate, right? So the way that it works, if I worked one job, let's say I made $50,000 at
The
that one job.
government sees your gross salary though, so if they see me making 40K here before taxes and 15K here before taxes, they see me making 55K,
Yes.
which isn't really fair because the 15K I'm making at that job cost me more time out of my life and it really
but
is
that
only
but
helping
that
you cover like expenses, right? Like most people are
yeah,
working two
and
jobs because they can't make ends meet.
so what do you say to someone who says you should just get a better job in the first place? Then it's your fault, so to speak, that you have a job that pays you $40,000 rather than one job that pays
Well,
you
that's the thing. Like somebody has to
sixty
do it,
thousand
right?
dollars, right? Yeah, yeah. But
So,
but the argument would be, right, like especially in our system, right?
no, yeah,
Um, because we live in a system where you earn an income based off of the job that you do.
yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I am an extreme advocate for the idea of everyone
Well, that's what I
should be
mean by there's
making
so
money.
many different variables. Like, I know people working two jobs that are making a ton of money. You know what I mean? And it's like they don't
and
even
that's what
really
I guess
need the
maybe
second
that.
job, right? Like,
Well, so
and
that
that's
then that's the other thing, right? Like, so let's
yeah,
flip it, right? You gave the scenario of like maybe you're working two jobs so that you can afford life. What if
yeah,
I choose to work two jobs? So like my wife is one of those people, works multiple jobs, but that's so that we like not so that we can survive, just so that we can
have
choose to
more.
have a
Yeah,
certain lifestyle, right?
yeah,
That we have more disposable income. By that same logic, would you say that the person who is just choosing to work harder in life to get more and more ahead, that they should pay the taxes because they didn't need that money, so to speak, right? Versus
yeah,
someone who,
yeah. Because it's like a matter of rags, like not even rags and riches, but like it's like personal choice again. Like if you're like it's the government sees everyone's taxes, they know exactly what you're paying, what your cost
yep,
of living is, right? So
yeah,
they know if this
yeah,
person's paying $2,800 a month in mortgage and makes $62,000 a year, they're not eating as healthy as the person that's making 95K a year and is mortgage free,
yeah.
right?
I
So
cannot. There is no part of me at all that agrees with you with that statement because of the fact. So okay, I, I'm not going to talk about what I believe from an idealist world, right? Like an
yeah, yeah,
idyllic
yeah,
world. You know, I that is my yeah, my soapbox that I stand on. What I'm more talking about is if we are trying to look at this from a current world reality, right? So not what you know, what I've talked to you about in terms of the idyllic utopian type of society.
yeah,
Um, I can't look at someone who works multiple jobs and increases their sources of income, whether they are poor or rich, and judge them differently. Now, I can make the argument with you that, and I've said this to you before, maybe. So, the way that our tax system works, obviously, hopefully, people have an idea of this. I don't know if we fully talk about this. Oh no, we do talk about it. This in the previous episode.
previous.
So, in the case of income taxes, right? We have a system. Just brief synopsis, right? We have a system called like a marginal tax system, and that what that means is that you have your source of income. So if you, let's say, make $100,000, right? It's not that your entire salary of $100,000 is taxed at a single flat rate.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
that it's broken down into different like kind of brackets of income,
Yeah.
right? So in Ontario, I think it's like whatever the first like $10,000 or something like that is not taxed at all, right?
Yeah.
And then it's like the next um
5 grand or
whatever
something. Yeah.
$15,000 is taxed at X amount, right?
Yeah.
And then so on and so forth, and it kind of goes up from there, right? So I would agree, if you would agree with this, I guess, because you didn't necessarily say this as a point, but I would say that it is fair to have a system where maybe instead of that $10,000 being the like tax free, instead you have a system
First.
where yeah, maybe it's the first $30,000, right? It means that everyone who is working who at
which
least
we
is
would
making
consider like the
$30,000
poverty line here.
is
Yeah.
getting that money, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, so there is like, so yeah, I was going to say there's two kind of ways that I would look at it. And one I do think is a little bit better than the other. You could have it where it's a flat system where everyone, if they make obviously this much money, their first $30,000 is tax free, right?
Yeah.
So both you and I obviously make more than $30,000. Our first $30,000, no taxes on it, right?
Yeah.
So that's one
After.
system that would
Yeah.
mean that at least at the end of the day, you're
Everybody
taking
gets a
home
base
$30,000
amount
to survive
to
in
live
life.
with. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're still making money above that,
Above
but it's
that. Yeah.
taxed,
But
right?
that's taxed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Obviously there is some stipulations with that I could go down a rabbit hole of. The issues will come into play of like, if you compare a system where you're currently where we're at now versus a system that you don't get taxed at the first $30,000, but then above that the tax rates are way higher, right?
Yeah.
There
Incrementally or
is a give
whatever.
and
Yeah.
take, right? Like there you may actually take home more money in a system that only gave you $10,000. That was like kind of free income, so to speak,
Yeah.
or not tax. I shouldn't even say free because it is your income. So there's that kind of things. Probably the better solution, again, adjusting for what those potential other tax rates are going to be.
Yeah.
But let's even just say hypothetically that the tax rates stay the same as what we have now. And this maybe I think would be more along the lines of what you would like hope for yourself. That what you do is that you have a system where maybe it's not quite $30,000. Maybe it's the first $20,000 or
something like that.
$25,000,
Yeah.
right? We can look at the numbers to kind of see what a basic standard of living we would want, right?
Yeah.
Based off of um, someone who, like you said, someone has to work those jobs. But you would have a situation where you only get that $25,000 or whatever tax free if at the end of the day you only took home, or sorry, not take home, you only earned, right,
Yeah.
before taxes, like pre-tax, let's say, I don't know, $50,000 or something like that,
Something
right?
like that.
Like,
Yeah.
right. So if you're someone who makes under a certain threshold, you're eligible for a larger sum of tax-free income, right?
Yeah.
So that I think kind of gets to where you're talking about this idea of like, obviously for yourself, if you work two jobs, you needed that money a lot more than, let's say, when I work two jobs, I don't need that money, right?
Yeah.
In comparison, right?
Relatively
Because
speaking. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, because like, sure, we both get by, but I maybe get by a lot better, so to speak, than what you might, right? Just based off of what our salaries are.
Yeah.
And so there's obviously people that make even way less money. And so those people, maybe those are the ones where you're like, okay, at least that $30,000 or whatever, that $20,000, if
Yeah.
you're going to take home that at least is going to help with your rent. It's going to help for your food. It's going to help for your whatever. Right.
Yeah.
But
Whatever,
it's still honoring the
utilities.
fact that in society, you, I, I, I'm going to say this, but I like kind of only agree to it to a certain point. But essentially, you work the jobs that you work, right? At the end of the day, if you're a server at a restaurant, if that's what you are doing with your life, then that's what you've chosen to do with your life, and kind of the positives and negatives, consequence wise, kind of come with that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So if you're only going to make so much money, then you're only going to make so much money. So it's not to kind of say that if you're someone who's choosing to better themselves and make more money, that I'm going to punish you more necessarily than someone who is struggling, right?
Just to keep their head above water or whatever.
Yeah, because it's all like kind of, you're trying to keep things as relative in the scope, right? And so it might mean that um, let's say for yourself, you might not be eligible for that flat rate of $20,000, but someone who's making $20,000 less than you is eligible for that
Eligible for
flat
it.
rate
Yeah.
with that extra 10 grand or whatever that they're going to get tax free.
Yeah.
Right. I do think a system like that has its merits. And you can make the argument that
No, yeah.
in some ways we kind of have that in the different ways that you can have tax deductions, right?
Yeah.
Um, there
Yeah.
are certain things that people who make less income can be eligible for, but then you also have the flip side is there are things that are within the tax codes that people with more money are eligible for, people with like, right, like across the board
Yeah.
there's always things that you can have deductions wise, right?
Yeah.
If you have a child, there's deductions.
Deductions. Yeah.
If you have a business, there's ways to have deductions. If you
Electric
have a
vehicle.
kid in
Yeah.
university, right?
Yeah.
Like there's always
Or a
something, right?
hybrid. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. And arguably speaking, people with less income have less tools at their disposal for reducing their income.